The arena lights faded to black as thunderous applause echoed through the stadium. Another electrifying WWE event had reached its conclusion, leaving fans buzzing with excitement and adrenaline. In the backstage area, two legendary figures emerged from the chaos of the evening: John Cena, still wearing his signature bright green shirt and cap, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, his massive frame wrapped in a crisp white t-shirt that stretched across his muscular chest. The cool evening air hit their faces as they stepped outside, a welcome relief from the intense heat of the arena. Their bodies still hummed with the energy of performance, sweat cooling on their skin, but their minds were already shifting away from the spectacle they'd just delivered. After hours of high-octane entertainment, protein bars, and arena catering, they craved something real, authentic food that would satisfy both their appetites and their souls. As they settled into the waiting SUV, John fastened his seatbelt and chuckled, his voice carrying a note of philosophical curiosity. You think people still believe in doing the right thing even when no one's watching? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Dwayne gazed out the window as streetlights streaked by like shooting stars, his expression thoughtful. If even one person does, then everything we stand for is worth it. The words carried the weight of two men who had spent their careers inspiring millions, yet sometimes wondered if their messages truly resonated beyond the roar of crowds and flashing cameras. John pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages from an old friend who had toured this unfamiliar city. "La Familia," he read aloud, his voice brightening with interest. "It's a small family-owned restaurant downtown. Apparently, the food's out of this world." The recommendation came with genuine enthusiasm, the kind that suggested hidden treasures waiting to be discovered. Dwayne's face broke into a smile, the first genuine expression of relaxation he'd shown all evening. "Sounds perfect. Let's see if they've got burgers with actual taste, not the cardboard they serve at most places." The restaurant didn't announce itself with neon signs or flashy displays. Instead, La Familia sat quietly on a corner street, its hand-painted sign swaying gently in the evening breeze. Soft yellow lights glowed warmly through windows that promised comfort rather than spectacle. But the moment they pushed through the heavy wooden door, something magical happened. A wave of genuine warmth enveloped them, not just the physical heat of a busy kitchen, but an emotional embrace that spoke of family, tradition, and love. The interior revealed itself like pages from a cherished storybook. Rich wooden panels lined the walls, decorated with framed photographs of laughing families spanning generations. Shelves displayed dusty cookbooks that had clearly been well used, their pages marked by countless meals prepared with passion. Vintage radios sat silent but proud, relics from an era when families gathered around them for evening entertainment. Smooth jazz drifted from speakers that looked like they'd been salvaged from a 1950s diner, creating an atmosphere that transported guests to simpler times. The air itself told stories, roasted garlic mingling with fresh pasta, something slow-cooked with the kind of love that couldn't be measured in recipes. Herbs and spices created layers of aroma that made their stomachs growl in anticipation. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a sanctuary where food was prepared as an act of devotion. The host's eyes widened slightly as he recognized the two celebrities, but his professionalism never wavered. "Welcome to La Familia," he said warmly, his accent carrying hints of generations past. "Right this way." He led them through the dining room, past tables where families shared intimate conversations and couples leaned close over candlelit meals. Their destination was a quiet corner near an upright piano with keys yellowed by age and countless melodies. The table sat in a dimly lit alcove that offered privacy while still allowing them to observe the restaurant's gentle rhythm. As they sank into soft leather seats that seemed to embrace them, Dwayne whispered with genuine appreciation, "This place feels like Grandma's house." John laughed, the sound rich with contentment. If Grandma made steak instead of salad. The joke carried deeper meaning. Here was a place that combined the comfort of family with the substance they craved after a night of physical performance. They placed their orders with careful consideration. A double cheeseburger for John, loaded with everything that made comfort food perfect. For Dwayne, a filet mignon prepared the way only family restaurants could manage, with attention to detail that chain establishments couldn't replicate. As they leaned back in their seats, the quiet atmosphere began to work its magic, allowing tension to melt away from muscles that had been performing for thousands of screaming fans just hours earlier. The restaurant hummed with the gentle activity of evening service, clinking silverware, soft conversations, the distant sounds of kitchen staff preparing meals with practiced efficiency. Other diners occasionally glanced their way, recognition flickering in their eyes, but the atmosphere of La Familia encouraged respect rather than intrusion. This was a place where people came to connect, not to gawk or interrupt. As they waited for their food, both men felt something they rarely experienced: true peace. In a world of constant motion, endless obligations, and public scrutiny, La Familia offered something precious: the simple pleasure of being two hungry people waiting for a good meal in a place that valued them as human beings rather than celebrities. Neither could have imagined that their quiet evening was about to transform into something far more significant, a moment that would test their character and reveal the true meaning of heroism. As John and Dwayne settled deeper into their comfortable seats, the restaurant's peaceful atmosphere wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The soft jazz continued its gentle melody, and conversations at nearby tables created a pleasant murmur that spoke of community and connection. This was exactly what they had hoped for: a chance to be ordinary people enjoying good food in a place that valued substance over spectacle. Then, in the far corner near the kitchen door, movement caught John's attention. A young man in a janitor's uniform moved between tables with determined purpose, pushing a mop bucket that seemed almost too large for his slight frame. His body moved with a distinctive awkwardness, and his eyes darted nervously from task to task, as if he was constantly worried about making mistakes. The young man's dedication was unmistakable. He worked with the intensity of someone who understood that his efforts mattered, that his contribution to this family establishment went beyond simple cleaning duties. Every surface he touched received careful attention. Every spill was addressed immediately, and every interaction with staff members was conducted with genuine warmth and respect. But as he navigated a tight corner near the kitchen entrance, disaster struck. The mop bucket caught on the edge of a table leg, tilting precariously before crashing to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire restaurant. Dirty water and debris spread across the polished hardwood, creating a mess that would have been embarrassing for anyone. But for this young man, it seemed catastrophic. He dropped to his knees instantly, his hands moving frantically as he tried to contain the spreading water. His movements were panicked, desperate, as if this single accident might cost him everything he had worked for. What struck both John and Dwayne most powerfully was the reaction of everyone else in the restaurant, or rather, the lack of reaction. Most diners simply looked away, pretending the accident hadn't happened. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly aware of the situation but unwilling to acknowledge it. A few patrons near the spill actually moved their chairs back, as if avoiding any association with the cleanup effort. The young man's distress was palpable, but it seemed to create an invisible barrier that kept others at a distance. The silence felt heavy with judgment and indifference. Here was someone who clearly needed help, who was struggling with a situation that could happen to anyone, yet the collective response was to turn away. The restaurant's warm atmosphere suddenly felt colder, tainted by the uncomfortable reality of how society often treats those who are different. Without exchanging a word, John stood up. The decision wasn't calculated or discussed. It was instinctive, driven by values that had been ingrained in him long before fame and fortune entered his life. Dwayne followed immediately, both men moving with the same purposeful stride they brought to the wrestling ring, but motivated by compassion rather than competition. They approached the young man, who was still on his hands and knees, frantically trying to clean up the mess. His back was to them, so he didn't see them coming, didn't realize that two of the most recognizable figures in entertainment were about to kneel beside him on a dirty restaurant floor. "Let us help you with that," John said gently, his voice carrying none of the booming authority he used in the ring. Instead, it was the voice of one human being offering assistance to another. He knelt without hesitation, his expensive clothes forgotten as he grabbed a handful of soaked napkins and began helping with the cleanup. The young man's reaction was immediate and profound. He gasped, his eyes growing wide with shock and disbelief. No, no, no. Please, sir. I'm sorry. I'll clean it. I'm so sorry. The words tumbled out in a rush, driven by fear and embarrassment. His hands continued their frantic movement, as if by working harder and faster, he could somehow undo the accident and make the situation disappear. Dwayne crouched beside them, his massive frame folding gracefully as he joined the cleanup effort. "It's okay," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle strength he brought to his most inspiring movie roles. "Accidents happen. We've all been there." The words were simple, but they carried profound meaning. Acknowledgement that mistakes are part of being human, that dignity isn't diminished by imperfection. But the young man's surprise was far from over. As his eyes focused on the faces of the two men helping him, recognition dawned like sunlight breaking through clouds. But you're... His mouth dropped open, words failing him completely. "You're John Cena, and you're The Rock. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh." His hands flailed for a moment, torn between continuing the cleanup and expressing his amazement. The transformation was remarkable. The panic and embarrassment began to give way to something approaching joy. "You two are. I watch all your movies and your matches. My favorite's the one where you slammed that guy through a table. And wait, you're here? You're actually here." John grinned, the expression transforming his face from celebrity mask to genuine human warmth. "Yeah, we get hungry too." The simple statement carried profound meaning, a reminder that fame doesn't elevate someone beyond basic human needs and experiences. The young man looked around the restaurant as if making sure this wasn't an elaborate prank, that these two legends were really kneeling on the floor beside him, helping clean up his mess. Other diners had begun to notice now, their attention drawn not by the original accident, but by the sight of two celebrities choosing compassion over comfort. "I'm Alex," he said finally, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm 19. I work here to help my mom and dad. They own this place." Pride crept into his voice as he spoke about his family, about his role in keeping their dream alive. "I try to clean and do dishes and take out trash and sometimes I spill stuff." The admission came with a return of shame, as if his occasional mistakes negated all his hard work and dedication. Alex looked down at his hands, still clutched around a soaked napkin, and his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I mess up a lot." The words carried the weight of countless small defeats, moments when he had fallen short of his own expectations and felt the sting of disappointment from others. In those three simple words lay a lifetime of struggle against a world that often measured worth by perfection rather than effort. Dwayne shook his head firmly, his expression serious, but kind. "No, Alex, you don't mess up. You help, and that makes you a hero." The words weren't spoken as empty platitudes or celebrity charm. They carried the conviction of a man who understood that true heroism had nothing to do with movie scripts or wrestling championships. It was found in daily acts of service, in showing up when it would be easier to stay home, in caring about others even when the world seemed indifferent. Alex's face flushed red, a mixture of embarrassment and hope coloring his cheeks. Really, the single word contained multitudes, years of wondering if his efforts mattered, moments of feeling invisible or unwanted, dreams of being valued for who he was rather than dismissed for what he wasn't. "Absolutely," John added without hesitation. "Most people your age wouldn't lift a finger for anyone but themselves. You're doing this for your family. That's powerful." He gestured around the restaurant, at the warm atmosphere and careful details that spoke of love and dedication. "This place exists because of people like you, people who understand that family means showing up, working hard, and caring about something bigger than yourself." The smile that spread across Alex's face threatened to split it in half. The transformation was remarkable, from a young man crushed by embarrassment to someone beginning to see himself through new eyes. "I want to be an actor one day like you guys," he said, his voice gaining confidence. "I'm even saving up for a camera. I made a skit once where I imitated your moves, and my cousin said it was funny." The dream wasn't grandiose or unrealistic. It was the simple aspiration of someone who had found joy in entertaining others, who understood instinctively that performance could bring happiness and connection. His eyes lit up with memory as he described his amateur attempts at filmmaking, the way he had studied their moves and mannerisms, practicing in front of mirrors and family members who encouraged his creative spirit. Suddenly energized by their attention and encouragement, Alex stood up and struck an awkward pose. "Can I show you my people's elbow?" Without waiting for an answer, he began to imitate Dwayne's signature move, his body moving with enthusiastic determination despite the obvious challenges of coordination and balance. The attempt was endearing rather than polished. Alex's version of the famous wrestling move included several stumbles and an almost fall that nearly landed him back in the mop water they had just cleaned up. But what he lacked in technical precision, he more than made up for in heart and enthusiasm. This wasn't just mimicry. It was a young man's way of connecting with heroes who had inspired him from afar. Both wrestlers laughed, not at Alex, but with genuine appreciation for his spirit and effort. They helped steady him when he wobbled, their hands supportive rather than corrective. In that moment, the restaurant seemed to fade away, leaving just three people sharing a moment of pure human connection. "You've got potential," Dwayne said, clapping Alex on the shoulder with the kind of firm encouragement that spoke of real respect. "Keep working. Don't give up." The advice wasn't generic celebrity wisdom. It was specific, personal counsel from someone who recognized authentic passion when he saw it. "And maybe next time use a dry floor," John joked, his timing perfect for breaking the tension while maintaining the warmth of the moment. Alex nodded enthusiastically, his laughter mixing with theirs in a sound that seemed to brighten the entire corner of the restaurant. Together, the three of them finished cleaning the spill, their teamwork efficient and natural. Other diners watched with growing interest, some pulling out phones to capture the unusual sight of two international celebrities mopping a restaurant floor alongside a young janitor. But the attention didn't change the dynamic. If anything, it reinforced the authenticity of the moment. When they returned to their table, the food had arrived, plates steaming with perfectly prepared meals that lived up to La Familia's reputation. The double cheeseburger John had ordered was a masterpiece of comfort food, loaded with fresh ingredients and cooked to perfection. Dwayne's filet mignon was tender and flavorful, prepared with the kind of attention that only family restaurants could provide. As they ate, John found his attention drawn repeatedly toward the back of the restaurant, where Alex had returned to work. The young man moved differently now, with renewed energy and confidence that was visible in every step. His shoulders were straighter, his movements more purposeful. The interaction had transformed more than just his mood. It had changed how he saw himself. "I like this kid," John muttered between bites, his voice carrying genuine affection and respect. There was something about Alex that resonated beyond their brief encounter, a quality of character that reminded both men why they had chosen careers dedicated to inspiring others. Dwayne nodded, his expression thoughtful as he watched Alex navigate the kitchen area with newfound grace. "Yeah, he's got something most people never learn. Heart." The observation was profound in its simplicity. In a world obsessed with talent, credentials, and achievements, they had recognized something far more valuable: the courage to care, the determination to contribute, the willingness to try despite the risk of failure. The peaceful atmosphere of La Familia seemed perfect now, enhanced rather than disrupted by their encounter with Alex. The restaurant hummed with its familiar rhythm, conversations, laughter, the gentle clatter of silverware on plates. Other diners had returned to their meals and discussions, though occasionally someone would glance toward their corner table or toward Alex as he continued his work. But peace, as both men knew from their wrestling careers, could be disrupted in an instant. The front door of La Familia was about to open again, and what walked through it would test everything they believed about standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. The evening was far from over. The peace that had settled over La Familia like a comfortable blanket was shattered in an instant. The front door didn't open. It banged violently against the wall, announcing the arrival of four men who brought chaos with them like a dark storm cloud. Their laughter was harsh and grating, cutting through the restaurant's gentle atmosphere like broken glass. The smell of alcohol preceded them, and one carried a beer can openly, slapping it against the hostess stand with deliberate disrespect. The hostess, a young woman who had been greeting guests with warm smiles all evening, visibly stiffened as they approached. Her professional demeanor remained intact, but fear flickered in her eyes as she attempted to welcome them. "Good evening, gentlemen," Table for four. But they brushed past her without acknowledgement, treating her like an obstacle rather than a person. Their appearance told a story of deliberate intimidation: dirty jeans, leather jackets that had seen better days, and an attitude that announced their intention to take whatever they wanted. One man's neck was decorated with a snake tattoo that coiled upward like a threat made flesh. Their boots left muddy tracks on the carefully maintained floors, and their voices boomed with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. The tallest of the group commanded attention through sheer presence and malice. His hair was slicked back with too much product, and a thick gold chain hung around his neck like a badge of misplaced authority. This was clearly Garrett, the leader whose twisted sense of entitlement would soon escalate far beyond simple rudeness. He headed straight toward the bar area, his voice cutting through conversations like a knife. "Hey, get us drinks now." The restaurant's atmosphere shifted instantly. Conversations dropped to whispers, then fell silent altogether. The gentle clinking of silverware ceased as diners froze, sensing that something dangerous had entered their peaceful evening. One elderly couple quietly stood up, leaving money on their table before hurrying toward the exit. Other patrons shifted uncomfortably, some reaching for their phones, others simply staring at their plates and hoping to become invisible. John and Dwayne exchanged a meaningful glance across their table. Both men had encountered groups like this before, bullies who fed on intimidation, who measured their worth by how much fear they could generate in others. Their experience in wrestling had taught them to recognize genuine threats, and every instinct told them this situation was about to escalate beyond simple disruption. Garrett prowled through the restaurant like a predator marking territory. He bumped into chairs deliberately, his laughter hollow and mean-spirited. "This place smells like old meat," he announced to no one in particular, his words designed to insult and provoke. The staff watched nervously, clearly wanting to intervene, but uncertain how to handle customers who showed such blatant disregard for basic decency. Other diners continued their exodus, the warm family atmosphere replaced by tension, so thick it seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Parents gathered their children closer, couples signaled for checks, and the gentle murmur of conversation died completely. La Familia was transforming from a sanctuary into a stage for confrontation. Then fate intervened in the form of that same mop bucket that had started the evening's chain of events. Alex had refilled it and was carefully moving it back toward the storage area when Garrett, turning sharply while continuing his boisterous commentary, walked directly into it. The collision was spectacular. Water flew in all directions, and Garrett hit the floor with a wet crash that echoed through the now-silent restaurant. For a moment, everything stopped. Garrett lay on the polished hardwood, his expensive jeans soaking in dirty mop water, his gold chain tangled, his slicked hair now disheveled. The silence stretched like a held breath, and for a heartbeat, it seemed like the situation might end in embarrassed laughter and awkward apologies. But Garrett's reaction shattered any hope of peaceful resolution. He exploded with rage that seemed to come from somewhere deep and poisonous within him. "What the hell?" he roared, scrambling to his feet with fury radiating from every movement. "Who the F*** put this here?" His voice carried a violence that made everyone in the restaurant recoil instinctively. His eyes locked onto Alex, who stood frozen with the same wide-eyed terror he had shown earlier, but magnified 100-fold. This wasn't embarrassment over spilled water. This was fear for his safety in the face of genuine malice. Alex's hands trembled as he gripped the mop handle, his body language screaming his desire to run while his sense of responsibility kept him planted in place. "You little freak." Garrett stormed toward him, his chest puffed with artificial authority, his fists clenched with very real threat. The words that followed were even worse, cutting deeper than physical violence ever could. "You trying to kill me or something? You don't belong here. You think you're normal? You're a burden." The restaurant remained frozen, paralyzed by the raw hatred pouring from Garrett's mouth. Staff members looked toward management, uncertain whether intervention would make things worse. Other customers stared in horror, some reaching for phones to call police, others simply too shocked to move. But Garrett wasn't finished. His voice rose to a roar that seemed to shake the building's foundations. People like you should have been thrown out before they were even born. The words landed like physical blows, and Alex took a step backward, visibly shaking under the assault of pure hatred. The attack wasn't just on Alex. It was on every person who had ever felt different, every family who had ever loved someone society deemed imperfect, every individual who had ever struggled against prejudice and cruelty. Garrett's words revealed the darkest corners of human nature, the willingness to destroy others to feel powerful. The room watched in paralyzed horror as evil revealed itself in broad daylight. Staff members remained frozen. Other diners continued their shocked silence, and Alex stood alone against a hatred that seemed too large and terrible for any 19-year-old to face. But not everyone remained seated. Two men rose from their corner table with movements that seemed to cut through the thick atmosphere like swords through fog. John and Dwayne stood in perfect unison, their faces transformed from relaxed dinner companions to something far more formidable. The real confrontation was about to begin. The silence that followed Garrett's vicious words felt like the moment before lightning strikes, charged with electricity and inevitable violence. Alex stood trembling, his young face pale with shock and hurt, while Garrett loomed over him with fists clenched and hatred radiating from every pore. The restaurant held its collective breath, witnessing cruelty in its purest form. But that silence shattered when two men moved with purpose and power. John and Dwayne rose from their table like forces of nature, their casual dinner demeanor replaced by something that reminded everyone why they were champions. Their movements were synchronized, deliberate, and carried the weight of men who had faced down challenges far greater than a drunken bully in a family restaurant. Garrett was so consumed with his assault on Alex that he didn't notice the approaching footsteps until a large hand landed on his shoulder and spun him around with irresistible force. When he turned, expecting to see another restaurant patron he could intimidate, his face went white with shock. "You've got 5 seconds to take that back," John said, his voice carrying a coldness that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. This wasn't the jovial entertainer who had helped clean up spilled water. This was someone who understood that some lines, once crossed, demanded immediate consequences. Garrett's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Recognition dawned in his alcohol-clouded eyes, and with it came the first hint of fear. "Wait, Oh, come on, man. We're just having fun," he stammered, his bravado evaporating like morning mist before the sun. Dwayne stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow Garrett whole. "That wasn't fun," he said, each word measured and final. "That was hate, and hate doesn't belong here." The statement carried the authority of someone who had spent years inspiring millions, who understood the difference between entertainment and cruelty with crystal clarity. The transformation in Garrett was remarkable and pathetic, from swaggering bully to cowering coward in the space of a heartbeat. He tried desperately to backpedal, his voice cracking with sudden terror. "Look, I didn't mean it like that. I was just, having a laugh." "Apologize," John commanded, his voice like steel forged in righteous fire. The single word carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind that brooked no argument or delay. Garrett looked frantically between the two men, then at his friends who had suddenly discovered intense interest in the restaurant's floor tiles. The room remained frozen, every eye focused on this moment of reckoning. His cronies, so bold when attacking someone they perceived as defenseless, now seemed to shrink into their chairs, desperately hoping to become invisible. All right. Damn. I'm sorry, okay? You happy now?" Garrett's apology was grudging, forced, delivered with all the sincerity of a condemned man's final words. But he wasn't done with his performance. He turned toward Alex with obvious reluctance and grunted, "Sorry, kid." Dwayne's eyes narrowed to slits, his expression making it clear that such a pathetic attempt at reconciliation was far from sufficient. "Now leave," he said quietly, but with volcanic force beneath the words. "Before I make you leave." For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation might end there. Garrett muttered something inaudible under his breath and began moving toward the exit, his wet jeans squelching with every humiliating step. His friends shuffled behind him like whipped dogs, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. One of them hesitated near the door, looking as though he wanted to apologize for their group's behavior, But Garrett barked, "Let's go," and they disappeared into the night. John and Dwayne returned to their table, but the tension remained thick in the air. Everyone in the restaurant seemed to understand that this was merely the eye of the storm, not its conclusion. Alex stood near the spill, still holding his mop, eyes wide with residual shock, but also growing wonder at what he had just witnessed. John approached him first, placing a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "You all right?" The question was simple, but it carried layers of meaning: concern for Alex's immediate well-being, respect for what he had endured, and recognition that standing up to bullies always came with a cost. Alex blinked rapidly, nodded, but his voice wavered when he finally found it. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I didn't mean to spill the water." The innocence in his words was heartbreaking. Here was someone blaming himself for another person's hatred, someone so conditioned to apologize that he couldn't see his own innocence clearly. "You did nothing wrong," Dwayne said firmly, moving to stand beside John. "You handled it better than most would. That guy was out of line, and you don't ever let people like that make you feel less than you are." The words were spoken with the conviction of someone who had faced his own share of bullies and overcome them through strength of character rather than mere physical power. Alex's expression began to shift from shock to something approaching awe. "You stopped him," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "Like heroes in a movie." The comparison wasn't naive. It was recognition of something fundamental about courage, about the responsibility that comes with strength and influence. "No," John corrected with a gentle smile. "We just did what anyone should have done. You stood your ground. That's real strength." The distinction was important. Heroism wasn't about having special powers or advantages, but about making the right choice when it mattered most. The restaurant began to relax incrementally. Other diners started quiet conversations again, some offering supportive smiles to Alex, others expressing their admiration for what they had witnessed. The manager, Alex's mother, approached with tears in her eyes to thank the two wrestlers, but they deflected her gratitude with characteristic humility. For the next 20 minutes, La Familia slowly returned to something resembling its normal rhythm. The music resumed its gentle jazz melody, conversations picked up their natural flow, and the warmth that defined the establishment began to reassert itself. John and Dwayne finally managed to finish their meals, though their attention remained partially focused on the windows, watching for any sign that the confrontation might not be truly over. They didn't have to wait long. The front door slammed open again with violent force, but this time the atmosphere was different, more dangerous, more purposeful. Garrett had returned, and the change in him was immediately apparent. He had replaced his wet shirt with a black leather vest that exposed arms covered in tattoos, and his eyes held a fury that went beyond mere embarrassment. Behind him came the same three men, but they looked different now, angrier, more focused, like a pack of wolves that had decided to hunt rather than scavenge. One of them carried a half-empty bottle of vodka, like a weapon. Another cracked his knuckles with methodical precision. This wasn't about saving face anymore. This was about revenge, about punishing everyone who had witnessed their humiliation. Garrett's eyes swept the restaurant with predatory intensity before locking onto Alex. "You thought that was over?" he bellowed, his voice carrying a violence that made several diners gasp. "Nobody embarrasses me like that, especially not for some charity case." John stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, placing his napkin on the table with the precision of a man preparing for battle. "You should have stayed gone," he said quietly, but his words carried throughout the silent restaurant like a death knell. Dwayne rose beside him, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire corner of the restaurant. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice carrying the kind of finality that made smart people reconsider their choices. "Turn around, walk out, and we'll all pretend this didn't happen." But Garrett was beyond reason, consumed by a toxic mixture of alcohol, rage, and wounded pride. He laughed, the sound hollow and twisted, like something that might echo from the depths of hell. "You think you scare me? You're just actors, overpaid clowns in tights who pretend to fight for cameras." John's response was quiet, almost conversational. "I'll take that as a no." What happened next would be talked about for years, becoming the stuff of legend not just for its physical drama, but for what it represented about courage, justice, and the responsibility of strength to protect the innocent. Garrett lunged first, but not at the two men who had challenged him. He went straight for Alex, the target he perceived as weakest and most vulnerable. The young man had been frozen in place, caught between terror and disbelief that this nightmare was continuing. But the moment Garrett moved, something remarkable happened. Alex didn't run, despite every instinct screaming at him to flee. Despite his body trembling with fear, he stood his ground and faced the approaching threat. John intercepted Garrett before he could reach Alex, his reflexes honed by years of professional combat, serving him well in this moment of real crisis. He caught Garrett's arm with precise timing, spun him around, and slammed him face first into a table with enough force to rattle dishes throughout the restaurant. Simultaneously, Dwayne grabbed another attacker who was charging toward them, lifting the man clean off his feet and hurling him over a row of chairs like he weighed nothing at all. The restaurant erupted into chaos. People screamed, glass shattered, and furniture scattered as the brawl expanded across the dining room. But this wasn't choreographed entertainment. This was real combat with real consequences. One of Garrett's cronies smashed a bottle against a table and swung the jagged remains at Dwayne, who ducked with fluid grace and responded with a sharp elbow to the man's solar plexus, followed by a takedown that left the attacker gasping on the hardwood floor. Another thug attempted to blindside John with a bar stool, but John's awareness was total. He ducked under the swing, swept the man's legs with textbook precision, and delivered an elbow drop that ended the threat immediately. The fourth attacker tried to escape, panic overcoming whatever loyalty he felt to his companions, but tripped over the same mop bucket that had started the entire confrontation, landing in a heap near the kitchen door. But Garrett wasn't finished. Bleeding from his nose and desperate with rage, he somehow acquired a steak knife from the scattered table settings. With a roar of pure malice, he brandished the weapon and charged again, this time directly at Alex. "You ruined my night, you little freak," he screamed, the knife raised high, his face twisted with hatred that seemed to transform him into something barely human. "Alex, move," John shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. But Alex didn't move. In that crucial moment, faced with genuine mortal danger, something inside him crystallized. His fear remained. His body still shook, but he planted his feet and stood tall, looking his attacker directly in the eye. "No," he